and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Emotions have a way of getting the best of us, especially fear. I think about nightmares, how eventually you can convince yourself that it's not real, that your fear was unwarranted, but without practice, it's impossible to tell yourself that in the moment. And then there's the real world, when we take ourselves out of our dreams and back into reality, and we encounter fear out there. That's what haunts me. Because when you're awake and darkness is stalking you, man or myth, those are life's real nightmares. I think that tonight's stories do a good job of pointing out that fear is fear, whether we feel it for the tangible or intangible. So, let's get started, shall we? I live in a flat building in a good area. It's a long, windy cul-de-sac, so there's not many cars coming in and out, unless it's people leaving or coming home from work. My boyfriend is away in Thailand for a month. We usually take the dog out together at night. I went myself, which I was fine with. I usually feel safe. Last week, around 8 p.m., I left the flat to take my dog for a pee. My dog is extremely excitable, especially around other people. She had just been spayed, so she had a cone on her head and stitches that needed to heal. I'm waiting for my dog to do her business, and a car pulls in, drives slowly past me. The guy did a friendly, neighborly nod towards me, so I did a small smile back, to be polite. The guy parks at the front of the building, and I'm on the other side of the car park, on the grass with my dog. I'm watching my dog, trying to get her to hurry up because it was freezing. I look up, and the man is standing outside of his car, staring at me. Freaked out by this, I turn my attention back to my dog. I keep looking over my shoulder, and he's staring with a creepy-ass smile on his face. I looked away again for a second, and he was walking along the road, slowly, towards us. I'm a really friendly person. I can be paranoid and aware. As a woman, you should be at night, but something about him made me feel scared. He's walking so slow, as if he wants to talk to me, so I hide behind a van, and I'm telling the dog, "Hurry up and pee." I can't see him anymore, which terrified the life out of me. All I can hear are footsteps coming towards us. The guy peeks his face around the van, and my dog goes nuts. She's jumping around, barking aggressively, which she never does that to people. And this guy doesn't take that as a reason to leave. My dog is showing that she doesn't want his presence. But even though she's doing this, he continues walking towards us, slowly. I start backing up and I say to him to please leave, as she's just had surgery and she's too excited. In the most quiet, sinister voice, he asks, "What's your name?" I couldn't really hear him. He kept repeating the question. I eventually understood what he was asking. My dog is still going absolutely nuts at him. I say again, "Please, my dog has just had surgery. You need to walk away. She's getting too excited." Ignored again. Walks towards us, asking my name, so I start walking away from him. He ponders for a minute, still smiling, creepily. He eventually backs up slowly, still facing me. I swear he did this for at least 20 seconds. He walks back to his car, looking over his shoulder at me, then stands back at his car and stares for another 3 minutes. I pretend my dog is doing something, when she's really just being a pain in the ass and standing there. I look up and he's gone. I'm shaking, sending my sister voice notes about what's going on. She's telling me, just go inside, but she doesn't realize I'm frozen in fear. Eventually, I see a woman and her son walk up to the front door, so I half jog over there with my dog to go inside at the same time as them. The front of the building has a glass door. I glance in, and the man is standing there, waiting for us. I told the woman, "This man's been following me and my dog. I'm scared." And she walks in with me. The man sees I'm not alone and walks right past us, out of the building again. I run into the lift with my dog. I get in and I lock my doors. I decide to tell my 2 male neighbors about it. As my boyfriend is away, they agree to run downstairs if I ever need them. I took a picture of his car, registration plate. As my twin sister gets the train home late at night after work, I want her to be wary of him. Well, today, I was out with my dog at 11 a.m., just doing our usual walk around the block. We walk into the building, and as we're heading to the lift, I see the guy peek his head around the corner. He was looking for me. He started walking towards me. At first, I don't recognize him, but then he smiled this creepy smile, and I realized who it was. He said hi, so I said hi, and then beelined it for the lift. He came towards me and my dog again. I pressed the lift button, just watching it come down from the 6th floor. He comes and stands closer to me. Again, my dog is going nuts at him. He asks what my name was. He has an accent, and he asks again when I didn't understand what he was saying. I ask, "What, my dog's name or mine?" He says, "Yours." I froze and said some fake name. He started to move closer. I had no time to pay attention. The lift was about to open and I could run away. He told me his name. I replied, "Nice to meet you." And finally, the lift doors opened. I walked in and pressed the button to my floor, hoping he would just leave me alone. He ran behind me as I walked in, and he went, "I'd like to see you again." What the fuck? Shivers ran down my spine. I was so creeped out. I replied that I had a boyfriend, but thanks. As I said this, the lift doors were closing, and he tried to stick his hand out to stop the lift from closing. Thank God they closed on time. I'm only on the next floor up, so I was so afraid he was going to run up as he could see what floor I got off at. I stopped for a moment and almost pressed a different floor, but I just wanted to get inside my house and lock the doors. The lift opens, and he's not there. So I beeline for the front door. There's a glass door to the stairs, and I swear, I thought I saw someone coming up. I ran in, and I locked the front door. I was so confused by what had just happened. Next thing I do, I message everyone with the update. They told me to get the phone for the non-emergency police number, even if just to get it on record. So I did that. The police arrived around 3 p.m. at my flat. I explained everything to them, and they said I could either A, get the police to go to his front door and tell him to knock it off, or next time he does something like that, tell him to leave me alone, and if he doesn't, phone the police, as it would then be considered harassment. But for now, the police couldn't do more, which is fair enough. I didn't want to anger him at this stage, as it's not a crime at this point. But why can't he just leave me alone? I've clearly shown that I'm not interested. I hate saying something is going on when it maybe isn't, but I just have a terrible gut feeling. So this morning, I was laying in bed in the process of accepting the day and getting ready, and I heard my bedroom door creak. I looked over, and I saw a very small, dimly lit face come through the door and come up to my side of the bed. I thought it was my son, who's 5, so I rolled over and was about to ask him what he wanted. The whole body was a shadow. The mouth, the nose, the eyes, they were the only parts that were illuminated. He held up a baby doll in one of those magic baby bottles right in front of his face and just stared at me. At this point, I knew it wasn't my son. And so I did what any grown woman would do. I put the covers over my head and rolled over to the other side of the bed. At that point, I felt the bed sink down, like the boy demon thing got into bed. So then I thought, okay, maybe it was my kid. And I looked over, and there was nothing. So at this point, I know I have to do a proper investigation and see if my kid was in his room. Sure enough, he's still in his room, tucked away, sound asleep. I also feel it's important to add that my son's door is messed up. He can't fully close it as it has to be finessed shut because the hinges are bent. So if he'd opened the door, I would have heard a noticeable noise, and if he closed it, it would have slammed. This also isn't the first time I've seen a shadow child try to get in my bed. I have about 3 other, slightly less interesting stories involving this possible spirit. This happened the summer of my sophomore year of college, when I was 20. I'd stayed in the area rather than going home for the summer with some of my roommates. Being that I was in a relatively safe area, Santa Barbara, California, I went out for a 4-mile run after dark. About halfway through the run, I noticed someone biking behind me, so I occasionally glanced back to check on them. I was on a relatively main road at this point, so luckily, for the most part, I wasn't alone with this guy. I only made 2 turns that he copied me on, so I wasn't convinced at this point that he was following me. The thing that freaked me out, though, was he was matching my pace perfectly. And keep in mind, I'm not a fast runner. A bike should easily surpass my pace. So I finally got to a point about half a mile away from my apartment where I'll have to turn off the main road to get home. I decided to play it safe. Nothing like this has happened to me before. And I go into a gas station to call a roommate to pick me up. I was nearly hyperventilating at this point, so it was even more comforting that I recognized the cashier who went to my college. Thankfully, my roommate answered and was a short drive away, so he headed straight over. When I walked out of the gas station, I noticed the biker standing by his bike on the corner opposite the gas station. And as soon as I got into the car, he jumped on his bike and pedaled off. My family has 2 people, me and my mother. My mother is a teacher and she teaches literature in high school. I was still in middle school when this happened. Usually after a stressful day, my mother would go to her friends. At about 2 a.m., she came home, reeking of beer. On the account of her wearing nice clothes, she wanted me to take pictures for her. The front of my house is mostly a large glass door, with iron bars crossed to make a frame. She modeled in front of the door. After a while, I reviewed what I had just taken. Everything seemed normal. Until one picture, I noticed something strange. There's a white streak behind the glass door, next to my mother's face. I tried to take a closer look, unmistakable. It's a face, a white face, with two black eyes, looking straight into the camera in a creepy way. So black that it seems to be just an eye socket and a toothless, wide mouth. Everything seems to be twisted into the center of the face. I have a feeling that this is not something that should exist, like I just saw something I shouldn't have, but it's clearly appearing right in front of my eyes. I started to feel cold. The more I looked, the more scared I became. My mother noticed, and she wanted to see what I had just took. I told her that there was something behind the door. She yelled at me, called me nonsense. But I know my eyes don't deceive me. And of course, her reaction confirmed everything. Her face darkened. She immediately sobered up, told me to remember to close and lock the door, turn off all the lights, and then she told me to go to my bedroom. She also immediately entered her room and closed the door. The next day, I checked the camera again. I couldn't find the picture. Maybe she deleted it. Since then, she and I haven't talked about it. It's been on my mind for so many years. I really wanted to tell someone. It's probably crazy enough not to believe, but I know I haven't lost my mind. I know what I saw. Even my imagination is not an element here, because she saw it too. My family doesn't worship or anything, and I'm not superstitious, nor do I believe in ghosts, but it was an event that 8 years later, I still can't forget. So this happened a few years ago. Me and my younger sister were walking our dog, and we were walking in a kind of sketchy part of our neighborhood. I know it pretty well, so I didn't feel unsafe at the time. However, as me and my sister were walking down a street that connected to some back paths in the neighborhood, this old white truck with a guy probably in his 40s drove past the street, looked at us, then backed up and slowly drove down the street that we were on. He parked right in front of the path that we had to walk down to get out of that street. He kept staring at us as we walked down the street. I began to get more worried, as me and my sister were quite young at the time. We were probably around 10 and 12. I had watched a few true crime shows at the time, so I knew not to go anywhere near him. We ended up walking in a ditch by the paths because I figured this was safer than walking up on the street because cars couldn't go down the paths. We ended up being okay, and thankfully, he didn't follow us after we got on the path. To this day, it still freaks me out because we were so young, and who knew what he wanted to do. Summer of 2022. I'm a cadet, and we had to stay in this old army base. Can't give the location, obviously. And this happened about a week in. One night, I had to pee really bad. Basically, my dorm was at the very bottom of this long hall. As I entered the toilet, I began to feel very uncomfortable, like someone was watching me. I went into the nearest stall and I did my business. I went over to the sink to wash my hands. I heard the door slam at the other end of the toilets, but I brushed it off as one of my fellow cadets. But then the door stall that I was just in slammed shut, and my heart was in my throat. There was no way that it could have been a gust of wind because it was relatively warm. I've never shared this story until now. Nothing can explain that night. So to give some background information, I'm spiritual. If you don't know what that is, spirituality involves the recognition of a feeling or sense or belief that there's something greater than myself, something more to being human than the sensory experience. I believe in souls, spirit guides, reincarnation, etc. My friend is a medium and can connect with the spirit guides and also ghosts and souls. My friend and I were hanging out at her place. We had the house to ourselves and decided to do a session. She was doing a session on me, and I asked normal questions like, what's my future like, so on, until I asked a question about one of my friends. This friend of mine has some trouble. He's been battling depression, anxiety, some other things. I asked if we could try and connect with her spirit guides and ask what was happening with her. We tried that. Bad idea. My friend who was doing this session had her eyes closed, was holding my hand, and her face started to twitch in an uncomfortable way. But I didn't want to disturb her, so I said nothing. Suddenly, the room we were in had this weird vibe, an unwelcoming vibe, just a very unpleasant vibe. She suddenly stood up from the couch that we were sitting on. She went to grab some incense and started saying, "You're not welcome here. Get out of my house." I've never experienced anything like this, as I was new to all of this at the time. Suddenly, this terrible feeling rushes to me. I don't know how to describe it. I think anyone that's met a ghost or soul knows what I'm talking about. The best way I can put it is trapped. I felt trapped. No matter where I went in the room, I felt trapped and small, like I was someone's prey, like I was being watched. Thankfully, my friend got this ghost or soul out of the house, and we sat down to talk about what had just happened. My friend told me that this is what's called a clinging spirit. It's a spirit that feeds on negativity and sadness, or in my friend's case, her depression and anxiety. My friend told me what she saw afterward. To understand this, you need to understand the floor plan a bit. So right as you enter the house, there's a staircase that goes upstairs. On the right is the kitchen. On the left is the living room, which is where we were. Neither of these rooms has doors in it. It's just the wall with a hole. The living room couch is at the opposite end of the entryway, so you have a full view from there. My friend said in the doorway, she saw this tall, skinny, black goo. It had no face, but had the shape of a woman's body. The moment it appeared in the doorway, it started screaming at my friend, like a very loud, painful screaming, a horror movie scream. The moment she opened her eyes, the ghost wasn't there, but the feeling of its presence was. That's also what I felt. After all this happened, we called my friend's mom and sister, and we slept in the guest room, as we were too afraid to go upstairs to my friend's bedroom. The horror of Gladstone Villa is that there was more than one ghost there, and it was meant for one family. This was a genuine experience that even convinced a skeptic and a non-believer, so it's worth a look, and it needs to be documented and shared with others. You may research this. What the family experienced defied rational explanation, such as very mild poltergeist activity, like lights going off and on, electrical cables being pulled by unseen forces. And there was the occasional sighting, but this was very rare. All of this occurred in the former mining town of Bargoed, in the Caerphilly County borough of the South Wales Valleys. All from 1969 to June 1978. Bill Higgs and his wife Rita moved into Gladstone Villa with their only daughter Caroline, sometime back in 1960. Everything was fine, no incidents at all. Caroline left school in 1965 and got a job in the bakehouse in Baldwin Street. Days regular. It was at the bakehouse that she met Douglas Dexter. He was from the neighboring village of Arbor Bargoid. He was nights regular, but he often stayed behind to make a cup of tea for Caroline. They started dating and were together for 3 years before they got married, April 1968. They didn't get their own place. They lived at Gladstone Villa with Bill and Rita. Douglas and Caroline's son was born August 1969, and it was soon after this that things started to happen. Caroline said it all started off in the attic. The family were all downstairs when they heard what sounded like someone jumping on the landing from the ceiling. They looked to see what was going on, naturally thinking it was a break-in. But when they reached the top of the landing, nobody was there, but the hatch to the attic, it was open. From that day on, the odd activity continued on a daily basis, and whatever it was eventually occupied itself in the master bedroom, which incidentally belonged to Bill and Rita. Noises like loud bangs and dragging sounds could be heard. Footsteps were heard in the bedroom every evening, sometimes during the day when the family would be downstairs watching TV. Bill would turn the volume down to hear it more clearly. Caroline said that on one occasion, she went up to her son Andrew's cot to find the pillow torn in half. Bill would record the noises with his tape recorder, and once he played it back, he heard the sound of an ambulance pulling up outside, but there was no ambulance. A warning. Soon after this, Andrew was in the Cardiff Hotel, in an oxygen tent. He, of course, recovered from this. A priest was called to Gladstone Villa. He blessed the property, and after a few short prayers, he duly left. But before he left, he parted with these words: "Watch the baby." As Andrew got older, he too witnessed the poltergeist activity for himself. He saw the cables being pulled by unseen forces. It all got so bad that the family slept downstairs with the lights on. Only Bill was supposedly brave enough to sleep in that particular room. One time he had a rather frightening experience in there. He was lying on the bed, and then he couldn't move, not even shout out for his family to help him. This could have very well been sleep paralysis, but he said later that he felt something in the room with him. A medium was called to Gladstone Villa. He asked the family questions, and then he began to challenge the spirit by knocking on the ceiling, and it immediately knocked back at him. At some point, he went into a trance to try to make contact, but he failed to get a name. He later said that there was a presence there, and that it was an earthbound spirit. It had unfinished business, something that it didn't do in life. There were a few more sightings. One evening, the family was watching TV. Carolyn just so happened to look to her left. She saw the full-bodied figure of a monk standing behind the sofa near the doorway. She later described it in detail as a monk in typical brown habit, complete with a hood over the head. The family left Gladstone Villa in June 1978, and 2 local businessmen bought the property. It eventually became Red's Park Hotel. Andrew had his 40th birthday there for old time's sake, and it was the staff who told Andrew that they too had experienced things there. Andrew did a thorough research into the history of Gladstone Villa and the area. He found out from local librarians that Gladstone Villa dated back to the 1900s, and a monastery was close by. This explains the monk that Carolyn saw. This is a true story. friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode, but don't miss a brand new one every Friday night. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to The Darkest Hour if you haven't already, and tap the bell so you never miss a thing. I want to thank those who shared their stories, and a big thanks to all of you for listening. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. A huge shout out to all of my patrons whom I appreciate so very much. Tracy S, Monica L, ZOEWATT, Shelly B, Donald C, Rat Girl, ALISHA S, ERIN G, NIKKI H, Mr. Revenant, and Naz K. If you want to support The Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon, patreon.com/thedarkesthour. You can keep up with me and all things Darkest Hour over on my Instagram, @thedarkesthouryt, and follow me on Twitter, AmandaJane TDH. Stay spooky.